In the last episode, the Dark Demon Society finally made their move, but one of their top 10 demons, Baemon, couldn't withstand even a single blow from Lu Sheng. After finishing off that demon, our boy was all set to test out his will projection. Just then, 2 more Dark Demon Society members showed up right in the path of the train. Seeing this as the perfect opportunity, Lu Sheng decided to stick around and toy with them. Soon, his avatar appeared in front of them, floating ominously in the air, making the 2 wonder if they'd stumbled upon a mythological figure from legend. Picking up where we left off, they quickly shook off their initial shock. Sure, the sight was surreal, but they didn't have the luxury to freak out. One of them turned to the other, saying there was no need to be spooked since those things don't exist. They knew this guy was strong, but if they attacked together, they might at least manage to escape, even if they couldn't win. The woman nodded, regaining her composure. They were, after all, 2 of the top 10 demons. How could they lose to someone who wasn't even at the level of a martial saint? Pooling their strength, they charged at Lu Sheng. In response, he simply watched them calmly, as if they were nothing but trash. He was mildly amused to see they even had some combo attacks up their sleeve. The woman took a deep breath and launched a massive fireball, while her werewolf partner lunged forward, dashing toward Lu Sheng. Seeing this, he sighed and shook his head. Both their strength and their techniques were just disappointing. With a gentle puff, he not only extinguished the fireball, but also sent the werewolf flying backward. The werewolf steadied himself, sweat trickling down his forehead. He couldn't believe it. He knew his partner's flames were powerful. How could a single breath blow them away like that? Then, to his horror, he realized he couldn't move. He was frozen in place by some kind of psychic force. His eyes went wide as he stared at Lu Sheng, stammering, How can you have such strong psychic power?" Lu Sheng shook his head and replied, "This isn't just psychic power. It's divine power." The werewolf's body began to contort, bending at unnatural angles as though he were being twisted into a ball. He let out a painful scream. Watching this terrifying sight, his partner immediately turned and bolted. To her, maybe Lu Sheng was the real demon here. There was no way she could beat him. Her only option was to run for her life. But just as she took her first step, she heard a calm yet chilling voice beside her saying, "Don't panic, he's not a demon." She turned slowly, only to find the golden figure standing directly in front of her. He was about to treat her to something special. Meanwhile, on the speeding train, the girl paced anxiously, scanning every corner for Lu Sheng. Where had he gone, and why hadn't he come back yet? They were nearing their destination, and she wondered if their mission was really just over like that. Just then, she heard a familiar voice beside her. Turning, she was surprised and relieved to see Lu Sheng grinning at her. She asked, almost in disbelief, where he had gone. He replied casually, saying he had just finished a little sewing project while holding up a bundle of thick rope. She blinked, obviously not understanding, but Lu Sheng only smiled back, offering no further explanation. Elsewhere, those 2 top 10 demons were tightly bound to a steel pole right in the middle of the railway tracks. They tugged and strained, but their combined strength couldn't break free. With horror, they realized the ropes were crafted from rare mithril gold, making them unbreakable. Then, one of them looked up and froze in fear. 2 high-speed trains were approaching from opposite directions, each engine linked to the ropes binding them. Back on the train, Lu Sheng checked his watch and decided it was time. He raised one hand slightly, activating his psychic energy. The 2 demons felt the ropes tighten around them, pulling them in opposite directions. As the train sped up, the tension grew until with one final pull, their bodies were torn apart by the force. Guess that's a modern take on the ancient pull-apart punishment. But this wasn't just about victory. It was about sending a message to anyone who dared to go after him. Just then, the officer approached him, reporting some unknown popping sounds. For his safety, she suggested calling in a helicopter to take him directly to the capital instead of staying on the train. Lu Sheng shook his head with a smile, instructing her instead to have someone clean up the tracks they had just passed. She nodded, uncertain about what was going on but determined to follow his orders. Meanwhile, back at the Dark Demon Society's temporary base, a man stared at a monitor. Horror struck. Another 2 of their top 10 demons' life signals had vanished, 3 in one day. He and his companion both trembled, whispering in disbelief. The top 10 demons were supposed to be godlike figures, each wielding incredible beast powers that made them feared worldwide. But now, 3 were dead in a single day. Could a martial saint have intervened? The woman beside him shook her head. She doubted that the three martial saints would have any special interest in their target, and the military didn't have anyone of that level. Biting her lip, she finally concluded that they might have underestimated their target's power. He wasn't just at a top general's level. He was more likely on par with a marshal. The man could hardly believe what he was hearing. Was someone like this even possible? A top-tier great grandmaster under 20, potentially with the power of a marshal? How were they supposed to handle this? Losing 3 top demons was too high a price. No payoff could justify such a setback. Should they just cut their losses and retreat? He was visibly shaken, but the woman beside him stayed remarkably calm. She agreed they needed to cut their losses, but retreat wasn't the answer. They had to finish the mission. After all, they'd been hunting this target relentlessly, and there was no way he wouldn't hold a grudge. If they let him keep growing, wouldn't he eventually come back for revenge? The man asked if they should immediately contact the organization for backup, but the woman shook her head. They still had the 4th-ranked demon, Lady Samagina. With her strength, she was confident they could kill the target. But the man pointed out a major issue. They had no direct contact with Lady Samagina. The organization hadn't provided that information. Suddenly, the woman dropped to her knees, clasping her hands in fervent prayer. She said they didn't need contact information. Samagina was always with them. The man watched, utterly confused. Then, without warning, she cried out, invoking the 4th demon, Lady Samagina, to descend. What happened next was horrifying. A hand emerged from the woman's mouth. The man scrambled back, completely shocked, but it only got worse. A woman began crawling out of the woman's mouth, stretching until the force burst the woman's head like a balloon. Now, standing naked before him, Samagina's cold gaze fell on the terrified man. She ordered him to provide the target's coordinates, showing no emotion and not even glancing at the sacrificed corpse behind her. Meanwhile, on the other side, Lu Sheng wiped the blood from his hands. Another Dark Demon Society member is down. He'd lost count of how many he'd taken out by now, but fodder was still fodder, no matter how many they sent. Glancing at the communication device from his latest guest, he guessed it probably had a tracking feature. If he kept it on him, the Dark Demon Society should be able to locate him. He was curious how many of them were brave, or perhaps foolish enough to keep coming. But by sunrise tomorrow, he'd be done playing around. At his current speed, he could reach the capital within a few hours, faster than a plane. However, his real goal was to get rid of Li and Su, and he needed to stay in top shape in case anything unexpected happened. Plus, he figured he'd give the Dark Demon Society a fair chance to catch up. After all, he didn't want them to fall too far behind. As he turned to leave, a thought struck him. Killing Li and Su wouldn't have too many consequences, but as the wife of a Jadao martial saint, he needed to ensure it didn't lead back to him. An alibi. Now that could work. Maybe he'd create some chaos elsewhere at the exact time of her death. With a plan forming, he took out his phone and dialed a number. On the other end, a surprised voice answered none other than Healing Su, our boy's future waifu. Lu Sheng casually asked her when the Chen family's birthday banquet was scheduled. She replied it was tomorrow evening, sounding curious and wanting to know why he was asking. Lu Sheng chuckled, saying he was just looking out for her. He already knew how these family banquets usually went. He assumed there was always some jerk trying to make trouble for anyone who wasn't fully accepted in the family, like her, for example, and he didn't want anyone bullying her. After a pause, he added with a smirk, "Come to think of it, she's practically the perfect main character template for a romance novel. Unaccepted by the family, standing tall despite it all, the whole thing." On the other hand, Ling Su didn't know how to respond. She told him there was no need for all that. She was practically invisible at Chen family events, so no one would bother her. But Lu Sheng, already set on his perfect plan, told her it was decided. She just needed to send him the address, and he'd be there on time tomorrow night to back her up. With that, he hung up. Ling Su stared at her phone, a bit dazed, wondering what exactly Lu Sheng was planning this time. Meanwhile, Lu Sheng pocketed his phone with a satisfied grin. Perfect. His plan was flawless. Take down Li and Su, then show up at the Chen family banquet and stir up some chaos. Whether or not Ling Su needed his help was beside the point. If he said he was going to have her back, she'd just have to go along with it. Simple as that. Hours passed, and the sun had fully set. In a dark forest clearing, a young couple was cozied up just outside their tent, gazing at the sky. Despite her thick jacket, the girl shivered and hugged herself. She pouted, asking the boy if he was messing with her, She couldn't see a single star. How was she supposed to believe there'd be a meteor shower? The boy, rubbing his cold nose, assured her he'd checked the forecast. It was supposed to be a once-in-a-millennium Pegasus meteor shower. In truth, he'd exaggerated to get her out there for a cozy night alone. He took the chance to suggest they warm up inside the tent. After a moment of hesitation, she nodded, and he began wrapping an arm around her shoulders. But just then, the girl gasped and looked up, saying there's actually a shooting star. A golden one, too. The boy looked up, equally shocked to see a golden streak cutting across the sky, which he hadn't expected at all. The show wasn't over. A second light appeared in the sky, this time a streak of red, heading straight for the golden one. They collided, and an explosion lit up the night. The boy hurriedly pulled out his telescope, his jaw dropping. 2 meteors colliding? That was anything but normal. As he looked closer, he noticed something even more unbelievable. There were people inside. On the other side, Lu Sheng landed gracefully, brushing the dust off his clothes and chuckling to himself. Who would have thought he'd get knocked to the ground one day? He looked ahead, intrigued by the swirling red vortex nearby. Looked like the Dark Demon Society had finally sent someone worthwhile. Emerging from the whirlwind was a woman who wasted no time, charging straight at him. As she dashed over, her after-images appeared, surrounding Lu Sheng from all directions. In response, Lu Sheng's will projection countered her attack effortlessly. After a brief exchange, he looked at her with satisfaction and said, "Not bad." Lu Sheng knew that advancing from an 8th-level Great Grandmaster to a 9th-level Martial Saint required a seamless fusion of mind, body, and spirit, harnessing universal energy to construct a martial avatar. He sensed that this woman was close, just one final step away. Samajina's eyes gleamed as she observed Lu Sheng's calm demeanor. "No wonder so many have died at your hands," she said, her voice soft but edged with danger. Acknowledging his strength, she took a step toward him. But Lu Sheng, relaxed and almost dismissive, replied, "If that's all you've got, this might be a waste of my time tonight." Instead of being provoked, she smiled with a wicked glint in her eyes, asking our boy if that's all he's got. While licking her lips, she continued saying, then he wouldn't get the chance to say that again. Suddenly, a surge of immense energy erupted from her, enveloping the area. Leaning forward, she told Lu Sheng he should feel honored, as he was the first in 5 years to witness her ultimate form. Under the moonlight, her transformation began. A single horn emerged from her head, and her lower body morphed into that of a horse. Odd as it looked, Lu Sheng could feel her power skyrocketing, though he didn't seem particularly impressed. In the next instant, she vanished. For a split second, Lu Sheng blinked. She was fast enough to actually catch him off guard. Before he knew it, her powerful kick sent him flying, and before he could recover, she reappeared above him, slamming both hands down with incredible force. She didn't stop there. A blast of energy erupted from her mouth, causing the ground to explode beneath them and leaving a massive crater over 100 meters wide. Energy waves rippled outward, and a cloud of dust billowed into the night. "It's over," she murmured, her face calm as she surveyed the devastation below, almost as if she had anticipated this outcome from the start. Then, a faint rustling sound emerged from the ground. Lu Sheng's voice broke through the silence, sounding almost disappointed with her transformation. He asked if her ultimate form merely allowed her to slightly increase the ceiling of a great grandmaster. She turned, looking startled, only to see him emerge from the crater completely unscathed. Dusting himself off, he pointed out that she hadn't even reached that level yet. A flicker of disbelief crossed her face. She said, "But Lu Sheng is just a great grandmaster too. How can he be unharmed after taking her full power attack? Who exactly is he?" As the dust settled, Lu Sheng's low voice cut through the night, saying he is someone on the verge of reaching the peak of martial arts. And as for her, she's no longer worth his time. In the next second, a terrifying aura erupted from within him, gathering all his strength into his fist.